This interview is brought to you in association with Rabobank.
New Zealand's horticulture sector is running hot. It's nearly doubled its export value since 2000 to nearly $3 billion, well over $4 billion if you include wine. But growth comes with challenges, and CEO of Horticulture New Zealand, Mike Chapman, is with me to talk about growth and challenges. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Yes, no, thank you, Roger. Pleasure.
Mike, where's the growth coming from?
Well, everyone knows that the growth is coming from kiwi fruit, for example, and kiwi fruit, in terms of value of exports, has grown around 80% in the last couple of years. But it's not just a story about kiwi fruit. It's also a story about apples, cherries, berries, onions, buttercup squash, and even potatoes. So, the whole sector is starting to move ahead based on the premium quality we produce here. If you look at the figures, 60% of what we grow in New Zealand in terms of fresh fruit and vegetables is exported. So our export market for our domestic growers is really important. So a lot of focus is placed on making sure what we export is of premium quality, and if it is, of course, it gets that high value return. And we do export high quality, and we do get the high value return. So the growth isn't just in volume, it's actually in value. We've seen the growth over the last 2 years across the whole sector, 40% in 2 years since June 2014. That's incredible.
Yeah, that is amazing. And it's a very broad base. Sure, there's been a lot of growth into Asian markets if they've opened up. But this is a sector that still sells a significant quantity of produce in Europe, isn't it?
Yep, Europe is and will continue to be a very important market for us. And although Asia is taking over in terms of some of the new varieties of apples and gold kiwi fruit, because it's been developed and grown by Plant and Food for the Asian taste palette, the standard product we produce at the premium end will still have a very strong place in both the United States and Europe.
They're buying our produce. They're also interested in some of the businesses. Probably the most standout example would be Turners and Growers, now German-owned. What is the broader role of foreign investment in the sector at the current time? Are you seeing more of it?
The sector is made up of a lot of growers. Some of them are quite small. Some of them, like Wilcox and Ball, in terms of vegetable growing operations, are big. But it's basically a New Zealand industry where New Zealand growers, New Zealand families, and groupings of New Zealand growers and families together form the backbone of the industry. And that makes it a very powerful industry. And the other thing that people often forget about horticulture is it employs a lot of people. Our figures are around 60,000 full-time equivalent jobs are in horticulture. And that's more than all of dairy. And the other thing about those 60,000 people is they live around the rural sector. So they give a social fabric to rural New Zealand, which is really important in terms of our cultural and environmental identity.
Now, the people that you've got in the business there, do you have enough of them? Do they have the right skills? Labour's been an ongoing issue in the sector for a number of years. Is that going to go away?
No, as we grow, and we are growing, as you heard from my figures, 40% in the last couple of years, we do need more skilled labour. And that is difficult to get. We are a seasonal industry in terms of our peak demand for labour. We have the RSE scheme from the Pacific, which is a brilliant scheme where the Pacific Islanders come down and work in the orchards and the gardens, and then at the end of 6 months they go back to the islands, having earned considerable money and taking home with them skills that they can use in the island communities. So it's not a migration, it's not a migrant program, it's a seasonal work program that's now been running very successfully for 10 years. And all the major employers in horticulture are part of that scheme because they need seasonal labour at the peak time. But then we have a large permanent workforce as well, and that continually needs to have new people coming in with skills. What will happen, though, in the next 5 to 10 years is we'll see technology become more prevalent in the industry. and that will take over some of the jobs that are currently done. For example, the University of Sydney is trialling a solar-powered machine that goes up and down rows of vegetables, weeding, spraying, and looking after the vegetables during the time that the vegetables are growing in the paddock. So the whole labour scene with horticulture is about to have rapid change due to technology coming in and taking away some of the jobs where we're struggling to get workers. But that then requires a whole new set of skills. And so, the demand across, all levels is increasing. And there's, as a result, a marvellous career for people in horticulture. Whether you start at the bottom end and working your way up, or you come in with a skill, there's a career for you and a long career.
What sort of support are you getting from the government? And this is, you've got phenomenal growth. We're an export-led economy. We've got a business growth agenda. How are you working with government to make sure that this isn't just a cyclical thing, and that actually this is a curve that carries on over the longer term?
Well, of course, we're feeding into the government's growth agenda very successfully. But there are a couple of key things that government has to do to ensure that we can continue to feed that growth. And what we need is the land that is of high quality for growing fruit and vegetables to be protected. We need water for that land. We need labour through schemes such as the RSE scheme. We need to keep out unwanted pests and diseases through the biosecurity system. And we also need the government to recognise that they need to have a food security policy protecting horticulture so that we can feed New Zealand and so that we can export to keep the growth agenda going. So we're advocating for the government to put in place a food security policy that looks to protect horticultural land from urbanisation and lifestyle blocks. And if you think about it, around all our major cities and towns, horticulture is clustered, and so as those towns and cities expand, often what is lost is high-quality land that has been growing great fruit and vegetables for many years. So we've got to focus on protecting that as a country, one, so we can feed ourselves, and two, so we can have exports that earn good returns for New Zealand.
I mean, I know there's a lot of talk about urban horticulture, and people are talking about the places that we might grow food may change, etc., etc. How realistic is that? I mean, it's a nice to do, but will it feed us? Will it earn us the sort of money that we're currently getting?
Well, you see pictures of leafy greens being grown in containers and old atomic nuclear power stations, etc. Leafy greens you can, and tomatoes you possibly can, but things like potatoes and onions you can't, and fruit you can't. So, there will be always a requirement for high-quality horticultural land that actually grows the produce on soil, out in the open. And if I was a consumer, by preference, I would want to have my leafy greens coming from a garden as opposed to a container. But that really brings us on, Roger, to another key point where the government can assist the industry going forward, and that's about country of origin labelling. We did a survey earlier this year, or commissioned a survey through Consumer NZ to just find out what consumers in New Zealand want. And that survey came back with some really interesting results. And those results clearly endorse what the consumer in New Zealand wants. It's all 70%. It's quite simple. Over 70% want to know where their fresh fruit and vegetables come from. Over 70% want to support local growers. And to do that, 71% want mandatory country of origin labelling for fresh fruit and vegetables. We're not talking about processed or canned, we're talking about fresh fruit and vegetables. Consumers in New Zealand want to buy fresh, and they want to know where their fruit and vegetables is coming from.
So why can't they? This is an issue that's been hot with Hort NZ for a number of years. Why is it not happening? If those numbers are so strong, it in theory should be a slam dunk for a policymaker. What's the hold-up?
I think the hold-up's been a concern that there may be some trade issues, and that's a very easy answer. All our exporters label our produce with New Zealand on it because the major countries we export to require that. So if you want to export some fresh fruit and vegetables to Australia, you've got to identify it as New Zealand. And that's the same for the United States, our key countries in the European Union, Japan, and even China. So we have to, as an exporting country, label our produce going overseas, and these countries require it by law. So if there is a trade issue, I'm quite certain, but by now, that trade issue would have been brought forward and all sorts of things would happen. So, trade's a two-way street. Our trading partners require country of origin labelling, but we don't. So it's not a trade issue. It's not blocked by trade. It's the fact is we're behind the game. We should be naming our produce in New Zealand and be proud of it, as our growers are.
Well, one of the things that's been achieved through years of putting New Zealand on apples and kiwi fruit and other products around the world is that they have become, in many respects, a connection to New Zealand that people who've visited, or even people who haven't visited, or relatives who've moved here or otherwise, they've become a connection to New Zealand. They're part of our brand story, part of the New Zealand story, and a lot of work's been done on building this New Zealand story. Yet agriculture, as far as I've seen, and horticulture hasn't featured very strongly in that to date. Is there a role for more of that productive food environment story to become part of that brand that we push around the world?
Without doubt. And, the marketing that companies such as Zespri, TNG Global do is all designed to promote the fact that the food comes from New Zealand that they're selling, and the fact it's high quality and premium produce. And so that, in the eyes of the consumers around the world, is an identification with New Zealand. And if you've never been to New Zealand, what you might know about New Zealand is the kiwi fruit you buy or the apple you buy. And so, yes, it is an integral part. And what we've been trying to do from HortNZ is tell that story, get that story out there more, particularly domestically in New Zealand. But the companies, Zespri, TNG Global, and the other exporters are always pushing that story. So if you like, there's a homegrown, export-driven story being told about New Zealand already, and what we need to do is just integrate that in with the other stories about New Zealand.
You've got the industry conference coming up in July this year. What sort of things are the burning platform for the industry to discuss, to move forward on, to embed this success over the longer term?
Well, the most important thing, and the reason that the horticulture industry has been so successful, is our focus on providing what the consumers want. And so with all these conferences, a key part of that conference will focus on what does the consumer want, and we're bringing to the conference, care of Rabobank, an American food and agribusiness guru. And he will be our keynote speaker. And what we believe he will be speaking about is how do you grow, how do you keep growing, and then feeding back from that, the conference deals with all other aspects related to getting to the consumer the produce that the consumer will pay a premium for. And what we'll be looking at is future disruptors coming through, future compliance, moving away from the chemical compounds we're using at the moment to more biocontrol agents, moving into biopesticides. That is the focus for the future. Consumers are not wanting the use of chemicals, and so what we need to do as a horticulture industry is move across and start using biocontrol, biopesticides, and integrated pest management schemes so we can deliver, without the use of a lot of chemicals, high-quality produce.
Look, Mike, thank you very much for your time today. Hugely appreciate it. We'll talk again soon.
Okay, thank you.
This interview was brought to you in association with Rabobank.